Welcome to the first, we'll call it the Inference extension now, meeting of the year. Thanks all for coming. Just a reminder, we are following CNCF guidelines. This is being recorded and uploaded to the cloud, so act accordingly. Cool. With that, let me go ahead and share my screen. We have a small agenda, but I think it might take up some time. Wanted to call out, yeah, you guys can see my screen, I think. Cool. We did have a review with our v0.1 API with the Signet leads. That was on Tuesday. My general feeling is it was reasonably accepted. Definitely some things we need to change. We do have the PR here. I'm adding comments from the meeting. Clayton had some comments that I was addressing in a different branch, but I'm going to bring it into this one because I think centralizing it makes more sense. But yeah, please feel free to review this. Would love as many thoughts and opinions as possible. Refining the API early is great. I did want to take some time to actually discuss one of the points that I think is coming up, because I think there's some reasonable arguments. With our criticality field, we are explicitly defining like distinct name levels. We have three: critical, default, and sheddable, where in order, critical is obviously the most critical, and then default, and then sheddable. The discussion is around letting users maybe define their criticality or priority level, giving it a value, giving it a name. I see valid arguments there. I'm a little hesitant because it might be hard to guarantee performance. Interested in thoughts, if anyone has any here. I would like to talk about it verbally. It's probably easier. So, opening the floor. Yeah, please, Daniel.
So I definitely see your feedback of it could kind of be a Pandora's box that we open up, letting users have this level of configurability. Yes, because this is the concept that, as you see, that I referenced priority class. I'd just be curious, like, how does I assume this is priority class, and priority class name for a pod is implemented in the kube scheduler. Just be curious to see how, how does the scheduler handle this? So just kind of throwing that out there in case anyone does know, you can provide input there. If not, then I think I'm going to take it as an action item to look into that in a little more detail.
Is Abdullah?
Yeah,
You should know this.
that's a good point. Maybe we'll come back to that. I don't see Abdullah yet. I don't have a good answer to that either. I've been struggling on the best path forward here either. My fear with this approach that we're starting with of name priorities is that we could box ourselves in, and you could end up with like, oh, we need a fourth category, and you end up with, a confusing name there.
This one's definitely critical. Yeah.
Yeah, super critical. I don't know, right? Or not quite critical. I don't know, right? So that's the fear. On the other hand, if we overly optimize, overly complicate this on day one by having an int-based range of 0 to 1,000, right? Then we've created so many options and so many unique test cases we need to support. And well, my extension works good with 3 levels of criticality. I don't know if it works with 1,000, or like what's that correct value. I'm not sure. I don't have a strong opinion on this one. I don't see an obvious, I think Clayton's comment in chat that we want to avoid overcomplicating this, where we need to have justification for a more complex solution, is fair. I don't know.
I'm trying to think through the banding comment, because the way I'm interpreting that is we take a number range and put it into these buckets, but that might.
I meant you might add an additional field that sets prioritization within a criticality, because legitimately I think the quaz model in pods is actually pretty close to this. Guaranteed gets resources first, then burstable, then best effort, and critical requests are going to get priority or are going to get considered before default and before sheddable. So I think in practice, there's a semantic, like the problem with a priority, it has no semantics. So sheddable is actually a pretty clear semantic that's very clear to an end user. If this workload is sheddable, it's the first thing that gets dropped. It's the lowest tier of creditors in a bankruptcy. And so, the internal, there's an internal argument that we have that you ain't gonna need it at Google. I think we're probably starting with like, let's just pick this. Like, I was only asking just to trigger this question, but start with the simplest thing. We have a lot of flexibility later. I mentioned this in internal chat, Colin, but I do think it's really important. This field should be a pointer. And if you omit it, we should not default the value of it so that we can distinguish between I didn't set a criticality and the extension can interpret it as they wish. And I did set a criticality and the extension has to honor it. And then there's a question of if we come up with extensions that don't need criticality, which given that this is everybody's going to be load balancing, I'm not sure that's the case. We leave it up to the potential to add more fields later. We could add a field later to the critical that applies for critical and default, but makes no sense on sheddable. And we would just spec that and say, by validation, you're not allowed to set this field if it's sheddable or something. Or we just add a priority that within each band, higher priority, we stack rank, or when we actually have a use case.
Why I didn't get the point about not having it as a reference or pointer and not setting it. Why wouldn't the default value, for example, here that we're describing in the setup?
If you apply API defaulting, you don't know whether the user originally provided the value or not.
No, I understand. I understand that.
You can't change. You can, if you added another field later that said, if you set this field, it overrides criticality. It can be exclusive with criticality. So what you can't do is if like we default criticality and then you come up with something that redefines criticality, we can't do that one of logic because criticality is always defaulted and you can't remove a defaulting in an API version. So this came up with in deployments. So like any field that you're not so certain about that you might not want to introduce a later field that just introduces a different behavior, you should make it a pointer and you should not default it in the API.
But why do we want a one-off? I thought that you were suggesting you define later priority within those three bands.
No, I'm saying it could be that we come up with a feature in the future that criticality, it completely replaces the concept of criticality.
Okay.
If criticality is defaulted into the API, it'll say criticality default, and then you set this other field. What would be better would be you have no criticality because you don't care. You set this other field and you prevent people from setting criticality because this new feature doesn't work with criticality. So it allows us to have exclusive features because an end user would have to set that other field. So they are telling you by setting that other field that they want this behavior. But if we've defaulted the value, like we don't know whether their original intent was also to set criticality.
No, that part I got. Like I thought you were talking about this in the context of banding and having priorities.
Yeah. We can imagine adding banding, which would accomplish what a top level priority field would do, but it's more complex and like the semantics of this are nice. Might as well introduce people to the idea of sheddable. And if we don't default it, then in the future we could potentially offer something that's different than criticality, like time fungibility, or perhaps there's a difference between sheddable that can be queued and sheddable that can't be queued, perhaps a latency target or a hard latency limit of how long you want to, like this request should always complete within 10 seconds, is a different kind of statement than making it sheddable. And you might be able to say like, oh, I'm okay. I don't care when it completes. It just has to complete before this deadline, is a orthogonal feature, but you might want to make it exclusive to critical. Like if you specify that, like, hey, I want to be time fungible, and then you specify that, you should not be able to set yourself as critical, because critical and time fungible, are arguably exclusive XOR features. That makes sense?
Yeah. So basically what we're saying is that criticality is not necessarily, it is a priority, but it's more than priority in some sense.
It has a really nice semantic, it communicates a concept pretty clearly that we have some experience with internally that applies to this domain, that we've come up with a reason for using it, but we don't have a reason that priority is better than for an end user than criticality.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask if we should make this criticality a struct with a string field, but it sounds like that might, if we have something that's orthogonal to criticality, that might not help us at all.
Yeah, I would generally, I can see the argument. I don't know that, maybe like this is like one of those, we don't know whether we're going to need it. So you want to leave as much room for operation further. We have historically said that there's value in having structs wrapping solo enums. It also just adds a bunch of crap to an API. And so it imposes a cost on every single user of the API for a hypothetical feature benefit. I think we've made kind of an argument that internally there was never a need for more than criticality. And so that could be an argument, like, as long as we don't default it in the API. I don't know.
Yeah, and if we star this, then I guess that does open us to creating that extension should we need it. That makes sense.
I don't think there's a way to do this, but I'd want to throw this idea out there because I think if we could find a way, it'd be great. I would love to find a way to basically accept string as user input here. So you have these names as user input, that the UX remains the same. But they can also, we have room for them for ints to be specified as well, right? And I know this is the interstring type. I really don't want to use interstring type, but I'd love the user facing experience to be a name, and then that just automatically gets translated to an int in the future, right? So we have that kind of room for growth. I don't think that's possible, but in a odd chance someone on this call has some cool way to make it happen.
You can always add a new field that is defaulted if unset from another field. I can't think of another example of like something like that in Cube though, Rob.
Yeah.
Like, and policies. So there was Brian originally in the API stock said, be careful about open-ended enums, right? It's hard to add enums because everybody writes code that's like switch, 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 and they forget their case statement, or they forget their else. And, that leads to bugs. And then when we know that there will be tunables, we should always set the struct with the enum inside the struct. Deployment was an example where we put the enum outside the struct, and it just in the end was not worth it. So like places where we had the enum and then we had a struct, we were like, in the future we just said just use a struct and then do one of struct checking. You're kind of arguing maybe for, I kind of think that defaulting a new field from a value of another field, if it's not specified, would actually accomplish, but I'm trying to think of another example like that in the API right now that nothing's coming to mind.
Yeah,
I
no,
I agree. Interstring is probably worse in this case.
yeah. I mean, what I'm trying to get at is because that enum example, right? I'm not convinced that 3 is our forever number, right? I feel like at some point we're going to want a level 4, or, you know, or another tier of this, right? And if behind the scenes everything that's implementing this is just using ints anyways, then you don't have that. But yeah,
If
I don't
we
know.
ever want to attach another semantic, if we can imagine a semantic that we would attach to criticality that we would not attach to an enum or to a number, I think that would be a good argument for not using the number. If, you know, and you could say that, like, you know, maybe somebody wants to opt out of criticality in an extension, and then they just want to say that it doesn't apply or it's ignored. That does give some room for, and it could be, you know, maybe an extension says criticality in the future is defined as priority 1. That's kind of what we did with priority and priority classes and system extensions. Like we reverse what we brought in the old special cases as the lowest numbers. So I do think that is a possibility here as well if we tried to introduce that in the future. I think, you know, like logging level is really funny. I talked about logging level. I loathe logging levels except when I really need them, which is filtering on stuff, but you still usually have to translate the log number for, like, you know, when you have info levels, everybody has to agree on a convention for levels. And so I think, you know, I think the argument too would be, can
No,
we
I mean,
imagine a use?
yeah, you can have a level as integer, right? It doesn't have to be like semantic specific.
Well, that's what I mean
levels.
is I feel like the cut line here is, do we have a concrete use case that requires more than the 3 we've defined? And, you know, we have examples of adding things to enums in the future all over the Cube API. We did it for restart policy, for example. We did it, you know. So I don't think we can add things to enums later. We should be really careful to define an API that leaves us room for maneuver, which I think making it a pointer does. And, you know, at some point in the future, you could always offer someone a migration from a criticality to a priority in a future API version or a
I like this option, like it's future proof. Yeah, the idea that not to default it, and then if we want to have something that supersedes it, we can add it and make it a one-off. It seems like, I mean, the most future-proof approach with a very good, like, you know, immediate term UX and API.
Yeah, I think that's fair because that lets us deal with simplicity in the short term, and then we can all live to regret it later and just look at it as this.
regretting it later is a success condition. The point of API design is to regret the things that are bad because you are successful. Every time Tim complains about the mistakes we made, what he is saying is we've been wildly successful because we had something that worked that people could mostly understand. And even though even though we all hate it, we still get useful work done with it every day. So what you described, Colin, is a win condition.
Cool. Well, then I think with that, we're good. I think we'll stick with the optional, which, yes, future-proofs us. And yeah, we'll all talk in hopefully 3 years and talk about how much we hate this. So anyways, moving right along. We are trying to plan a release for the v0.1 in about a week. So like I said, please give us your feedback. Next week, your feedback would probably be for like a v0.2, just so you know. The slides are here. I've linked them in the PR. Thank you, Rob. Sorry about that. I did include the inference pool config proposal. We don't have to talk about it today if we're not ready, Abdullah. I just brought it up, its existence, so people could get
Yeah.
eyes on that.
I wanted to talk about it, but we're running out of time. I don't know how much time we have left.
Yeah, we have 8. We can kick it to be priority 1 next week, if that's cool.
Sounds good. Yeah, if we want to do that, and then because the header one is probably faster, Rob.
Yeah, mine. I think mine is really quick. I didn't even get a chance to create an issue. I will do that. But you know, one of the things we've been trying to include here in our spec is this kind of what should an extension do to select an endpoint, right? And the answer seems to be it should set a header, sure, but what header? And we can choose whatever header we want to be part of this spec. I threw out an example here of X gateway destination endpoint. There, you know, this is, you know, if you're looking at Envoy, Envoy has some examples of X Envoy, I forget, original destination host, etc. Like a variety of things like that. I don't think we need to be too tightly coupled with Envoy here, as long as it can work in underlying implementations. So this is one idea. If anyone feels strongly about header name, speak now. Otherwise, I'll throw out a PR and we can go from there.
And to be clear here, this header name is not going to be something that, for example, Envoy has to adopt, or you know, any other, like, you know, gateway has to adopt. It's a convention for us, for whoever is going to implement the inference extension spec.
Yeah.
Right. So it's that. Yeah. I just want to clarify the scope of where we are enforcing this name.
Yeah. That's fair. And Danien's comment is good. I should create an issue for this one. First, you know, what I really am hoping here is to try and build out our spec for what it means to be an extension, right? We have our single reference extension right now, but we do want to make sure it's viable to have additional extensions developed around that are compatible with this whole ecosystem. So this is a key part of that.
And Rob, what exactly would be the type? Is this an IP address? Is it an HTTP?
Yeah, I think it's an IP port.
IP.
Yeah. And that, you know, I imagine we're likely going to need more than this. This is just a starting point. I think what you will eventually need in the future is some additional information, such as if this endpoint doesn't work, you can fall back to, you know, this additional set of endpoints. So that's likely maybe another header. I'm not sure yet. Yeah, and this is on. Sorry, on the comment of docs, I think this is Kellen adding that, but I have a docs PR that is trying to add this kind of skeleton, and I think I have a section in there that will kind of leave room for these different protocols, and because we're really trying to define first a user-facing API, but then these kind of protocols for what it means to be an extension and what it means to be a model server framework in this space.
Yeah. We might I think we're in the first stage of mitosis right now, so I don't think the cells are splitting quite yet, but yeah, just in preparation, I think, yeah, distinction is great.
Yeah. Sorry, I think I cut someone off. Danien, maybe?
Yeah, Rob. So since we're on the topic of extensions, I was just trying to think, you given any thought into kind of extension levels similar to Gateway API, where there's core, extended, and implementation specific, or is my kind of understanding of extensions off?
Yeah, no, I mean that kind of. So this specific extension I'm talking about is really a different concept, and that's the idea of like an extension to select endpoints, right? So given information about a request, tell me which endpoint to send it to, right? That is the interface here. I think there's probably other categories of extensions that may eventually fit in here, whether it's like semantic caching or some other thing. But right now it's really just about how do I select the endpoint to send to. And so
Okay.
A little bit different than that kind of like core extended, et cetera, in Gateway. I think so far everything inside this API, that the API surface that is proposed for 0.1 is so narrow. I think the expectation is that everything would be effectively core for an implementation of this API. And hopefully we can stick with that for a good period of time.
I have one thing I want to bring up related to this, which is what is the scope of that spec? I would suggest that probably this is what other people think, but it's good to call it out. Like the spec that defines the relationship between the gateway and the extension is different from the one that we define between the extension and the model server. And ideally, those are two different things. They're not tied together at all, and they are not released as one version or like, you know, and so it's good to call that out. I think Chong has a PR to start defining what we know about the model server protocol. But yeah, I mean, just wanted to call that out. There's two different things. We probably need to spec them like, you know, separately, and not release them as one entity.
I think, yeah, I mean, in the reality where we are right now, I think, yeah, these are all just going to come as they come, and we're like early stages of mitosis, I think is what Kellen said. Yeah, I mean, this is, we're still trying to figure it out, right? But I'm hoping that as the project stabilizes, like maybe by 0.2, we have meaningful release that covers the full set. And, you know, then you can have a change log that really covers, this is what we had in the, you know, protocol or spec for, I don't know, extensions in 0.1, and here's how we've amended that in 0.2 or 3 or whatever, right? But yeah, I agree. Right now, we don't have that fully fleshed out, so it can't really be part of 0.1.
I'm actually thinking more about, like, you know, fundamentally they should be different as well. Like they should be separate. Like, for example, right now we use KV cache utilization, and we can have part of the model server spec that the model server has to emit a KV cache utilization metric. That has nothing to do with the idea of an extension that picks an endpoint as a spec, right? Like if you want to standardize and spec that. So that's why I want to separate those two, because they could evolve in different ways.
Yeah, that's, yeah, I that's fair. I mean, we basically have at least 3 unique things that we're squeezing in this single project. We have kind of the API surface. We have the actual reference extension, reference implementation of an extension. And then we have these kind of interface specification for model servers, extensions, whatever, right? You know, I'd hate to have 3 separate releases for everything, but you know, at the same time, trying to bundle everything together is going to get messy. So
yeah,
I'm not sure. Danian, I think you're spot on. We should make this meeting longer, because I think as we, you know, we've got a lot to figure out between now and KubeCon in particular. So
Yeah.
adding some time to this meeting could be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, we all have busy schedules. It's nice to be able to get everyone in one, you know, virtual meeting room and brainstorm and, you know, share ideas, ask questions. So that would be really nice.
Agreed. Yeah, I can talk to Yuan, I think has control of that, and get this bump back up to 60. That sounds great. But on that note, that we are at time. So we'll see y'all next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.